This is the Tree of Life, Season 20, Chapter 3. In this episode, we will be elaborating regarding the incoming and outgoing consciousness during reverse substitution events under tautological natural law in the context of larger trends or behaviors. To begin, in Season 19, we talked about how when operating under tautological natural law, in the absence of hierarchy, the incoming consciousness tends to be the individual who has already acquiesced and integrated a particular impulse into their self-representation. Thus, as you move towards a destination, consciousness flows away from the execution point, or destination, as the leader becomes the incoming consciousness for the second, and so on and so forth. This same mechanism can be applied to larger trends within society as a whole. The trendsetters in society, those who by their access to media distribution, are those who act as leaders under tautological natural law. Thus, by becoming the incoming consciousness, they propagate their behaviors throughout the masses, by acquiescing in the place of the outgoing consciousness during reverse substitution events. Thus, under tautological natural law, in the absence of hierarchy, the behaviors of those within media propagate via the incoming consciousness during reverse substitution. In other words, tautological natural law is indeed tautological, because the behaviors of those with media access propagate their behaviors, which become the conventionality of the masses, defining the particular social rules of behavior which determine the temporal and spatial coordinates of substitution events. Thus, under tautological natural law, despite not being hierarchical, there are tiers nevertheless, which describe the levels of dispersal of one's acquiescence through the masses. Among the top tier, one estate, of tautological natural law, are those trendsetters who have access to media dispersal, whether by way of film, television, radio, podcast, social media, YouTube, or otherwise. By possessing the ability to disperse their personality, they irrigate those of the lower tiers with their acquiescence, resulting in promulgation of their behaviors through recurrence outside the reverse substitution. The ability to restrict or undermine the dispersal of personality provides a second distinct estate in the context of tautological natural law. For these institutions or external structures which determine who gets airtime and when, ultimately selects for particular individuals for the highest tier. Thus, although tautological natural law is theoretically not hierarchical, it becomes so when the selection of trendsetters is not governed by the demand of the people, but rather driven by a second distinct estate. The conventionality, which becomes a product of the highest tier, is not merely a construction, but rather determines the timing and spatial location of substitution events as well. Thus, under a tautological system, not only is the morality of the masses determined by the highest tier, so too are the conditions for reverse substitution, the flow of consciousness from vessel to vessel. The highest tier guards their position in setting trends sometimes by acting during reverse substitution events to compel acquiescence to a particular impulse which created the event. That's the end of the podcast for today.